And it's really lovely to see so many familiar faces, because it's very much Shrewsbury Sangha and Taraloka is very much a two-way affair. So Taraloka benefits hugely from many of you coming here quite regularly and just helping out in one way or another. And yeah, right now we've got a retreat on. It's just coming to an end tomorrow, and then I'll be leading the next retreat, our Tara retreat, starting on Friday. So it's good to be back open again. Yeah, so it's very nice to see you all. I have had experiences of like going and doing Zoom evenings at other sanghas and having someone fast asleep in one of their little boxes in front of me. So I'm hoping I'm not going to do that to anyone tonight, but we'll see. So yeah, so Saravantu gave me this title. She wanted me to talk about a dharmic response to social and ecological issues, and I wouldn't choose this title personally. Can someone just give me a thumbs up and say you can hear me all right, because I'm quite a lot of people look frozen. Yeah, okay, that's good. Okay, so yeah, I wouldn't have chosen this title particularly. I'd rather something a bit more poetic. But the reason what this title is about, a dharmic response to social and ecological issues, is a priority that was agreed by the European Chairs Assembly. So I'll just say a little bit about that. So if you can remember back to before the pandemic, in January of 2020, when maybe there was something happening in China, but nobody really knew what it was, we had a European Chairs Assembly at Adistana, and what we were looking at was strategic priorities. We wanted to set some priorities for the next few years. And January 2020, well, the previous year, or the previous 18 months had been really quite interesting with the IPCC, the report on climate change they put out in 2018 was pretty dire. And then in 2019, we had the UN biodiversity report, which was saying something along the lines of, 1 million species are facing extinction. So in the wake of that, it for me, I felt very strongly that one of the priorities that should be there at the Chairs Assembly should be some sort of response to the ecological crisis. And the wording was what we managed to agree between us. Yeah. And the dharmic response bit was really important. People don't want just any response to social and ecological issues. They wanted a dharmic response, and I was really hoping that somebody else would give a talk saying what the dharmic response is. But it's come back to me. So I'm just going to say a little bit about my experience of being in Triratna, because I've got and environmental stuff. I don't know whether this chimes with anyone else particularly, maybe Akasha Raja, people who've been around a bit longer. But I came into Triratna at quite a young age, and from a background in conservation and an interest in the environment. And I understood, from a brief experience working in conservation, that actually what was most important was changing our minds, a fundamental transformation of how we were, and I needed to start with myself, and that seemed quite clear. But in my experience of being in Triratna has mainly been this sort of sense of actually what's really important is Dharma practice, whatever that is, and environmental stuff is a little bit of a distraction or a little bit of a sideline, or yeah, something like that. It's just kind of played down a bit. Yeah, I went along with that for quite a while, but I think I've just come to the conclusion I don't agree. I just don't agree. If there is that sort of attitude still. So so what I want to just talk about a bit is, well, what does Buddhism say traditionally about environmental issues? So it was written a few years ago, but a paper was written by a guy called Ruben Habito in 2007, and he was anyway, he did a sort of survey of different schools of Buddhism, and he was just trying to find out. Well, his question was, Does Buddhism support and foster active concern for and engagement with our ecological well-being on this planet? It's quite a long question, but that was his question. And he came to the answer, not necessarily, but possibly. Not necessarily, but possibly. Because I just want to say a little bit about this, because I think it's often maybe a lot of people just assume, oh yes, Buddhism and has, you know, and environmental issues go together. Of course, there's a natural fit. I don't know whether it is that straightforward, actually. So when Habito looked at early Buddhism, the things he pulled out, and I think he could have pulled out other things, but the things he pulled out were the emphasis in Buddhism on freedom from suffering, freedom from the suffering that we create ourselves with our minds, with our mental state. So freedom from that dukkha, and the primary importance of that. Over and above everything else, yeah. And in a sense that there's this, you're probably very familiar with this. There's a sort of parable of a man getting shot by a poisoned arrow, and he's asking all sorts of questions about who shot the arrow and where did they come from and what family and da-di-da. And actually, the point is, he just needs to pull the arrow out. That's the most important thing. So the Buddha used that image for people who wanted to speculate about metaphysics. He said, look, you're wasting your time. You just need to get on and work with your mind. And I think in that sense, maybe other issues out in the world are seen as like, can also be seen in a similar way as less important, or as a distraction from the urgent work of freedom from dukkha, freedom from suffering. And also with that sort of sense of, we get a sense of the environment was just more seen as just a receptacle, a sort of inert, passive sort of place within which you could gain freedom. And then Buddhism also inherited from Hinduism a sort of traditional cosmology where world systems arise and mature and decay, and then there's a period of annihilation, and then the next ones arise. So he was pointing out that with these different views of the mind is the most important thing. Get on and work with your mind. The environment is a bit of just a vehicle, a receptacle within which we live our lives. And actually world systems arise and also pass away, disappear. You can end up with a sort of sense of a Buddhism that has scant regard for ecological issues. It's a particular sort of Buddhism. I'd say it was a bit world denying. It's a bit quietistic. But those were the things he pulled out. He could have pulled out other things, as I said. But then he went and looked at more the Mahayana tradition. So this is where we have the philosophical basis is that of shunyata, or emptiness. So this sense of nothing has an inherent graspable, fixed essence to it that is separate from anything else. So you get the sense of the way things depend upon each other, the way things, some teachers use the word almost leaning on each other in a certain sort of way. Nothing stands alone, and a sense of profound interconnectedness. So based on that sort of Buddhism, Habito was saying, well, actually, yes, possibly there is a sort of basis upon which you can then meet environmental issues. But that said, I think there's sort of other thoughts about, well, we're in a very particular situation at the moment. It's unprecedented. How helpful is it to look back to something, to thinking 1,000 or 2,500 years ago? How helpful is it to expect to actually find anything relevant there. And I think in a way there's a sort of tension that Buddhists need to hold. On the one hand, we always need to look backwards to the lineage, to the tradition, and also what we're trying to do is engage with what's happening right now. And in a way, the very premise of what was of Triratna, what was the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, is what does Buddhism look like now in this culture, in this time. So I think we need to sort of do the backward looking at the Buddhist tradition. And I think we can do things, I mean, the Karaniya Metta Sutta, can easily be unpacked into well, it's quite explicit, a love for all beings. So in a way, how does that look when we live it out? And those of you who know Dhivan, who's an order member in Chester, he's been looking at reinterpreting the early symbolism around the Buddha's awakening. So the images that you get there of the tree, the Bodhi tree, the goddess who bears witness to his practice over lifetimes and his readiness to become enlightened, and also these nagas, or these dragon serpent beings. So in a way, he's been looking at those and saying, actually, I think you could interpret that as in a symbolic way, as showing a deep connection between awakening and nature. So there's those sorts of things we can do. And then there's also this sort of more forward looking, where actually it's down to us to work out how to apply things. In a way, what we're trying to do is understand the root causes of whatever contemporary issues we're facing. And I think, certainly in terms of the environmental, ecological crisis, you could say the root causes lie in the depths of what of what it is to be human, and what our tendencies are like. And in a way, that area is the area of religious traditions, spiritual traditions. That's what that's what they have something to say about, is human nature, our tendencies. And I think so where I'm going with this is, I'm saying I think we need to Buddhism already has been, and I think we need to continue to work out how to apply this. I don't think there's anything that will tell us how to do it particularly. I think we need to work out. I think we need to be creative. And I think any spiritual tradition that isn't creative and ongoingly trying to meet situations as they rise is essentially dead anyway. So in a way, this is what a living Buddhist tradition looks like. This whole edge of, well, we're not sure, well, we don't know, well, should we do this or should we do that? That is a living Buddhist tradition, rather than a mess, or whatever you like to think of it. Or yeah. So Sarabhantu gave a completely delightful introduction to this series of talks, and in there she was talking about a sort of what the Dharma could bring to this was issues, sort of social issues more generally, or engaged Buddhism more generally. But I'm going to just look at what a dharmic perspective, and I'm basically putting social issues to one side because it's just a very big basket. I just want to focus on ecological stuff. I'm going to use a list that Vishvipani came up with. So you may or may not be familiar with this, but from last summer at the Audi convention, he gave a talk on engaged Buddhism. And I just found that the principles that he drew out very interesting. So this came from Vishvipani, and he's the kind of guy who ends up on Radio 4, sort of thought for the day type thing. So he's had a lot of practice of just having to bring a purely Buddhist and entirely non-political perspective to various current issues. So he has six issues that he enumerated. The first one was the centrality of mind. The centrality of mind. So these six issues or principles or areas or qualities are particularly what Buddhism can bring to any issue that it's engaging with. Yeah. So the centrality of mind. And he was just bringing out this principle that Buddhism has an understanding that our well-being, the well-being of any individual human being, is not dependent upon consumption or pleasure. It's much deeper than that. And he was talking about mindfulness, or being in the present moment. That was particularly what he was bringing out in a way that is something that Buddhism's been offering to the whole area of mental health. But I think the centrality of mind, I think for me, I just wanted to say, well, there's more than just being present now to the situation. I think there's something for me about meaning and how we imagine ourselves, how we imagine what we are in the world that matters. So in a way, who is present and what are we present to? And I think what makes us, in terms of our well-being, what makes us happy is usually anything that involves us not being endlessly obsessed with ourselves. And in a way, in terms of the environment, to see ourselves as part of something bigger, to be participative in a greater whole, makes a huge difference. So I think this area of centrality of mind, for me, it evokes this sense of a connection to a bigger whole, and how we imagine what we are in the world affects what we can be, and in a way what the world can be. There's another value he drew out, which was compassion, or karuna, and he was talking about that we just value well-being in a way, I suppose, people flourishing in their lives just for the sake of it. And I think we can make that broader again, so we can value life, full stop, all forms of life, for what they are, with no sense of, he talked about non-instrumentality, so no sense of it being for anything. It has its own intrinsic value, and in a way, a respect for that. I mean, it's been a very familiar argument, hasn't it, for years, around biodiversity, people trying to say why we need biodiversity, we need all these different creatures. And sometimes it ends up, well, there might be some antibiotic out there that we haven't found that, could be in a particular plant species. And in a way, that's true. But actually, everything has an intrinsic value, and we could just leave it there. It doesn't need to be justified. So the third point he brought out was conditionality. So the way things arise in dependence on conditions, and they also cease in dependence on conditions. But basically, the actions have consequences. Actions have consequences. And this fosters a long-term perspective. So this just brings in this whole area of sustainability. And I think, we're just, Taraloka is just inside the Welsh border, and Wales has been quite groundbreaking in this area in terms of the government. They've brought in this Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, where any decisions they make have to bear in mind the benefit, the well-being of future generations. And that's a sort of like a first in the world. It's pretty radical, and well, what a fantastic way to think. What a fantastic way to think about any decision that we make. How does this affect future generations? So another quality he brings in, the fourth one, is metta. So in a way, metta and karuna are connected. Metta, loving kindness, when it comes into contact with suffering, any sort of suffering, becomes flavoured with compassion. The metta is simply a loving attitude to all beings, but particularly what Vishvipani was drawing out was a sense of inclusivity. So nothing. So when you learn the Metta Bhavana Center, in a way, we're trying to feel metta for all beings without pushing the ones we don't like out beyond the pale in some way. So it's inclusive. Every being is included. And this is a sort of little. This is where I can go on a little bit of a rant if I'm not careful, because you know what I hear people doing, and maybe I do it myself, is with the Metta Bhavana, we talk about love for all beings, and then we just talk about humanity as if it's the same, And I notice this quite often slipping between all beings and humans. And I have a little beef about the way that we are so anthropocentric. In other words, we place our humanity, at the center of everything. So it's all about human beings, and other beings don't get much of a look in. So I think when we talk about metta, this Buddhist attitude of metta, and I think it is, it's there in the Karaniya Metta Sutta, it's all beings. Again, I think plants are included. It's not just animals in a way. And where do you draw the line anyway? Where does life start? So I think we can push ourselves on this a lot more, our anthropocentric viewpoints. But again, it's something that Buddhism can bring with this quality of metta. The fifth quality he brought in was contentment. Again, this sort of working against our materialistic, consumerist culture, a sort of recognition that there is a finite planet. And he was saying that his sense is that there's a hunger in society for some sort of vision, any sort of vision really, that locates happiness away from consumerism. And this is something I think maybe quite a lot of us have been thrown up against in during these various lockdowns. In a way, it's hard to consume quite so much, and in terms of experience at least. And I have been just wondering a bit about this. I think it's very hard for people, unless they're real hate types, to give things up. I think renunciation's hard, and I've just been wondering to myself whether I could take less through love. Take less because I love the world, rather than take less because it's some sort of renunciant spiritual practice, or I know intellectually I've got more than my fair share, but just take less because I have a heart response with the whole. I have a heart response with the whole, and an understanding that I want to express my care for the whole. Anyway, I'll just leave that one in there. And then the last point that Vishvipani made, doing all right. The last point that he talked about was skillful communication. And this is such a tricky area. So this is something, interestingly, Buddhists, we have the 10 precepts, we have 4 speech precepts. As Sangharakshita says, it's because it's really hard to keep the speech precepts. We have got something to offer, and also, probably any experience of more than a few months or years in the Sangha or in the order, you'll know that actually we're not necessarily that good at it. We're not necessarily that good in this area. And I think that's fine. I think we just need to keep going with it. I think we're starting to, we have to keep having difficult conversations. I think we do. I think in order to, this whole, what I was talking about earlier about we're having to experiment, we're having to figure things out for ourselves. A lot of that is going to involve quite robust discussion where we just disagree with each other. And actually that's fine. But how we disagree with each other really matters. So and that's the bit we could really do with getting better at, particularly online. But I think in a way, sometimes we probably recently, I think the order's probably shocked itself to some degree. And, maybe that's not a bad thing for us to be a bit shocked by how easily we can polarize in communication. We need to find ways of doing that better. But all of those 6 things, the centrality of mind, compassion, conditionality, metta or loving kindness, contentment, skillful communication, these are all areas that Vishvipani was thinking about as distinctively Buddhist qualities that we can bring to any social issue. And so I think we can think of those as being distinctive dharmic perspectives that we can bring to environmental matters. But what might it be? What might it look like when we apply these qualities in terms of responding to the environmental crisis? I'm going to say crisis because I think it is a crisis. And I suppose something I've been thinking about, again, in terms of what's happening in Triratna is actually we need a range. We just need a very broad range of responses. There are many, many ways of responding, and I think all of them are valid, and actually probably we need all of them. People are responding, there's people in the order who are pretty hardcore activists, padlocking themselves to things, risking arrest, doing quite edgy stuff. And they're very committed to that. It might be in the area of politics more. It might be, I mentioned Dhivan, so going back and looking at reinterpreting early Buddhist stuff. We've got Buddha Field and their Eco-Sattva project, where they're trying to find responses and ways to live. I think they have an idea of a land-based response. We've got permaculture gardens. There's Eco-Dharma out in Spain, very much engaged in supporting activism. There's ideas for sort of woodland sanctuaries and more nature-based rituals, more nature-based Dharma teaching and practice. There are all sorts of ideas, and actually there's probably something happening in all of those areas. And I also want to just mention animism, which I'll come back to later. So I think all of those probably need to be explored, considered. And I think the other thing about maybe in terms of what it looks like in Triratna is we're quite an anarchic movement. There's a very strong emphasis on the individual and yeah, I think what it means is like there isn't going to be a sort of Triratna policy on ecological issues. There isn't going to be something overarching like that. I think, yeah, we are too sort of anarchic, and with the autonomy of the individual and the autonomy of different centres and councils is quite strong. I think what we can do, though, what I would like to see more in Triratna is just more of a sense of support and appreciation of individuals and collective, and this is sort of like associations of individuals coming together because they've got something in common. So more of a sense of support for people engaging in their own ways with environmental issues. Yeah, sort of affirmation in that is a very valid thing to be doing. Yeah. Again, I think also fine if there's robust criticism, fine also. I think it's always good to check. I think it's a hard line to walk between holding those dharmic principles and then getting swept up in end results and slight power struggles and the ego coming in. So actually that's just the work of any Buddhist, is just noticing those in any situation. But we're all, in a way, we all need calling on that from time to time. That's fine. But I think what I wanted to say in this area is actually, because we need to experiment, because there aren't any given answers, and because the tradition that we're part of is 2,500 years old, and we can't go back, and there was different issues back then. We need to be prepared to experiment. It means that we will get things wrong, and that's fine. Actually, it's like as part of a process of learning, getting things wrong, whatever that means, is inevitable. I mean, in some ways you can say the only thing that you get wrong is when you don't learn from something. Yeah. So where are we going? Right, I've just got one more thing I wanted to talk about. So that's a sort of so what I've given you is a bit of my sort of take on what it's felt like in Triratna in terms of the environment, where the ECA came to with this strategic priority, this sort of overview of more early Buddhism, more traditional Buddhism, and then Vishvipani's 6 qualities that we could bring in. I want to say something a bit about what I'm personally interested in exploring, have been exploring, which is this whole area around animism. So this is something that if you've read Living with Awareness, Sangharakshita's book Living with Awareness, you might be familiar with this bit. In there, when he talks about, there's a whole section on the elements, and when he talks about the elements, he gets into this realm of animism, about what is living, what is alive, and what isn't. And we draw a nice line, we draw nice lines between humans and other living things, between animals and plants, between plants and fungi, and then we think fungi are a bit weird, maybe we'll just ignore them. And, and we draw a line between living and non-living. And they're all concepts. If you push on any of them, you start to get into trouble. So he talks about this area of the duality we always hold of living and non-living. And he has this marvelous quote in the book, which is, "I would go so far as to say that a universe conceived of as dead cannot be a universe in which one stands any chance of attaining enlightenment. And then whether you stand any chance in a living universe is, of course, up to you." So, I mean, that's just a fantastic sort of quite challenging quote there about what would it be like. I suppose this is the question I've been asking myself. What does it mean to live in a living universe, or to allow that to be a possibility? And how much do I just see things as sort of, in a way, inert and dead and just functional? And what happens if I maybe allow that it doesn't have to be like that? And I think the reason why I'm interested in this area, because there's some consequences to how we think. Things can just be, we don't need to come into relationship with things, and they're just utilitarian. When we start to perceive the world around us in all its forms as being alive, then we start to come into relationship with something. Yeah, if mountains are alive and streams are alive and trees obviously are alive, then actually we start to be in relationship, a dynamic communication even with the world around us. Maybe even the chest of drawers behind me, that sort of sense. And then you start to have ethical duties towards those beings. Yeah, you actually start to have duty, almost a duty of care. And I'm interested in that because that fundamentally impacts how you live in the world. And you could say that these issues around, well, the environmental crisis is down to how we treat the world, and it's down to what we think the world is there for. Is it there for us, and what we think we are in the world? And so I'm just interested in I don't even know how to do this exploration. I'm just trying it. I'm just trying it out and talking about it and trying to lead meditations around it, and just because in a way I think if we could come into a different relationship with the world around us, we would it would really fundamentally affect the way we act. In the Japanese Tendai tradition, they talk of the Buddhahood of grass and trees, and the non-duality of living beings and the environment. So in a way that it's already been touched on at points in the history of Buddhism. It kind of means that we participate in an awakening universe, rather than us awakening in a universe which is sort of out there and somehow other. So that's pretty much most of what I wanted to say. I suppose my questions to you are around the area of what is your response to the environment, to the issues that we face in the moment. How does Buddhism, how does your Buddhist practice affect how you respond? In a way, yes, where does the interest lie? And in a way, are you willing to be experimental? And are you willing to get things wrong sometimes? And are you willing to have robust discussions with people around this area? So in a way, this is what I'm asking, because this is all about love, this is all about love. And we're trying to find ways to express love in a situation where actually things are becoming quite critical. So how do we do that? So and just to I am hoping that we're going to get a website up soon, this sort of a sort of Triratna environmental website where we can actually start to pull things together. So there'll be some sort of way of people getting at the different groups and the different individuals and the different practices and the different information that's sort of in a way is already happening around responses to the environment. So I'm going to finish. Sarah Bantu quoted James Baldwin in her first talk, so I'll just finish with that quote. It's quite good. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So I'll stop there.